It's high time for a new era, one that not only invests in the ambitions of women and girls, but one that's shaped by them. Our next session is a series of conversations that takes aim at the practical realities of achieving gender equality, locally and globally. First, we'll look at the community level with trailblazing Somali peace activist Ilwad Elman, Lebanese feminist researcher and powerhouse Lina Abu Habib, and Argentina's UN resident coordinator, a true UN vet, Roberto Valente. Then, we're kicking it over to a special one-on-one chat between self-described Afro-politico-feminist and influential policy strategist Schaefer Okore and Alan Jope, the CEO of Fortune 50 company Unilever, which last year achieved gender balance across its management globally, a year ahead of its target. And the conversation won't end there. For true gender equality, it's not enough to change cultures from the ground up and businesses from the inside. We've got to change systems. So that's what we'll be discussing with our two final guests. Botswana's youngest minister ever, Boholo Joy Kenowendo, who now sits on the G7 Gender Advisory Council, and Nala Valji, a UN changemaker with the tough and critical mandate to end violence against women and girls everywhere. All to say, you're about to be in very good company. And we're so lucky to have a special moderator for all of these conversations. Internationally recognized gender equality advocate, Katja Iversen, someone who turns heads and minds. Take it away, Katja.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, guest, friends, viewers, speakers. Welcome and thank you for joining SDG Action Zone panel with the inspiring title, A New Era for Women and Girls. Yes, indeed, a new era is on the horizon, one that is shaped by girls and women, one that invests in their dreams and ambition, one that is to the benefit of all. Because we know, and research shows, that a diverse and gender equal world is a better world. This panel will first zoom into the lives on the front line, those who are doing everything they can to change the attitudes and behaviors in communities and societies where the oppressive cultural norms, history, and overall indifference stand against girls and women. We'll have a great panel with us there. Then we'll call for a rebalance of politics and power with a conversation with people who have formal power to do just that, to make the real and concrete change happen. It is my humble wish that while we still have a long journey ahead before we have a gender equal world, actually not a single country has full gender equality just yet, this panel will inspire viewers with the promise of a new era. My name is Katja Iversen. I'm your moderator, instigator, time police, and for this section, and also a fierce advocate for women's rights, leadership, gender equality, and sustainability. Before we jump into it, I have a favor to ask all of you watching. Please help us make some noise around this on social media. The hashtags are hashtag SDG Action Zone 2021, hashtag for people for planet, and if you can fit in, hashtag UNGA 2021. I'm super excited to be here first with some of the frontline fighters. Let me start broad and then drill down. So Roberto, Lina, if we want to see a gender equal world and a new era for girls and women, who needs to do what to create real change in communities and countries? Lina, will you start?
Absolutely. I will be very brief. My region, the MENA region, has witnessed the second cohort of revolutions. And these revolutions, for the first time ever, were led by all the unusual suspects. They were led by women, they were led by migrants, they were led by queer communities. And women and queer and migrants have been targeted personally. They have been killed for speaking out. And these are particularly the people who are shaping our new struggle in the region. These are the people who are saying enough is enough, enough dictatorship, enough humiliating us. We will not take this anymore. And you want to kill us? Fine, there will be more coming. So for me, I think the last 3 years have been incredibly important, at least at 3 levels. One, who are the people at the front line of the revolution? Women, queer, migrants, and all vulnerable people who have been pandemic in a state where the regimes are only good for oppressing people but defunct when it comes to bringing services. And then I will take a photo out. And then thirdly and lastly, at least we are starting to talk about different forms, feminist recovery, feminist state, feminist forms of societies that are inclusive. So in 2 words, people on the ground, queer, migrants, these are the ones who are making change happen.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. I really like the feminist recovery. Thanks for sharing that. Roberto, if we want to see that gender equal world and a new era for girls and women, who needs to do what to create that real change in communities?
Well, there is no shortcut, absolutely. I mean, I think that society at large has to do a lot, but obviously taking into account that gender imbalances, the whole injustice around women, girls, somehow being prejudiced by so many, particularly men, requires that we work on masculinity. So masculinities require that men themselves focus on this. Clearly, the LGBTQIA+ movement, together with the feminist movement, are doing a lot, but they need to be working together and being supported by the rest of society, and taking into account also that gender inequalities, gender-based violence respond somehow to political, socioeconomic, and cultural factors. We need essentially to ensure that those that lead within those domains, with the socioeconomic, cultural, and political domains, they take also charge and somehow assume leadership in addressing injustices that are deep-rooted and long-lasting.
Thanks. So the people who have the power, who sit on the power, but also the front line, the ones who are really living the reality of a gender unequal world as we see today. That's who we are. Yeah, thank you. So Lena, the Middle East and the North African region, it's often at the center of attention of the world's political and media. So, for example, I hope you're safe. I hope your family, your fellow activists are safe after the big blast in Beirut, and knowing that the conditions are really difficult. But Lena, using every trick in that book, how can we leverage the world's attention on the MENA region and focus on how to further women's rights? Women in all their rich diversity, of course. But how can we take that focus that often is on the MENA region and turn it into something we can use?
Katja, that's a great question. I hope you can hear me. The focus on the MENA region historically hasn't been a good one, I'm afraid. It has been laden with stereotypes. It has been laden with, I might say, false narratives. And it has overlooked the amazing diverse forms of.
We are experiencing something that we often do, and we have to be aware of all the time, that even internet connection is not equally distributed. So I think that's kind of what we're experiencing now. Lena, I think you're back.
So I was saying that the MENA region has been a victim of its fame because it has been a very negative kind of fame for terrorists, fame for, being on the one hand oil-ridden, but on the other hand, extreme discrepancies in wealth, and with a the West being totally oblivious of the amazing social movements that are taking place, that have always been taking place. So actually, Katja, we have to get to the realization that one of the things why we continue to be here is that these misrepresentations, these false narratives in the region persist. How do they persist? Egypt has been boasting recently that it has let go of a few cases of civil society actors, and the West is clapping. They're saying, well done, Egypt. A couple of women's rights defenders are out. Important cases of injustice vis-a-vis a woman human rights defender, Mohsen Hassan, a famous feminist who has been uncompromising in standing up to the government. She remains under travel ban. She remains under security threat. She remains in a situation where she fears for her life. So actually, number one, to answer your question, is let us explore these false narratives. They are not true. Okay. Number two, let us connect directly with those of us who are actually, let me say this, Katja, we know what we do. We know what kind of activism we are out there. Okay. We need our stories to be heard. We need our narratives to be out there. Our nation setting is dominance of the regime's narrative, and these are not democratic regimes. Let's be breaking these stereotypes about the MENA region and understanding that there are movements taking place, recognizing these movements, connecting with these movements, talking with the feminists. And yes, we are safe. Thank you ever so much.
Thanks, Lina. Let me get back to you in a minute, but I'm just going to jump to you, Roberto. You are the UN resident coordinator in Argentina, and you said a little bit about it before. It is a country that is leaping when it comes to legislation right now. A country where we've seen activists on the street successfully fighting for the right to abortion, for LGBTQIA+ rights. Would you talk a little bit about where you are seeing real tangible things happening in regards to gender equality that is impacting, like, say, real people's lives? And also, what can the world learn from what is happening in Argentina?
Well, first of all, I think that Argentina, as well as many other Latin American countries, what they have that is fundamental is a super vibrant feminist and LGBTQIA+ movement. And I think that that self-empowerment, is critical to advance the sort of revolution that Lina was talking about, that is important in the MENA region and is also important in a region like Latin America, where absolutely you're having excellent legislation. You're having right now, we've been having on the abortion laws, we are having some of the most progressive legislation that have cut across the divides in so many ways. Not everybody is happy, but fundamentally the protection of children and the actual freedom of movements and girls has been guaranteed through proper legislation, debate, and legislative action on the ground. We also have in Argentina things like 1% of public servants quota for transgender persons. I mean, this is something that you don't have even in Northern European countries, the Nordic countries, or United States, etc., etc. I think that from the South, you have very solid policies that can be emulated all over. But at the same time, you're having a massive problem that is femicides. The so-called feminicides in Argentina and in Latin America. You're having major violence exactly within shelters and homes and those that are considered safe havens from family members, from close ones. So the whole issue about those invisible problems that normally are underreported are being tackled in Argentina and Latin America where we have this major pandemic that sums up and adds to the COVID pandemic that further exacerbates these problems.
Thank you. Thanks. And, you know, what the world can learn, I think you have just pointed to it. There's so much that's actually a lot more progressive and forward thinking in terms of legislation and other elements where it is not.
And what sorry the interruption, but what it can learn is that essentially you need to start with self-empowerment. Then society has to accompany and embrace. And it's not just about inclusion. It's also about participation. And it's not just about compliance to, to ethical norms and behaviors. It's also, is about really taking that and bringing it forward because you really collaborate, because you feel that this is part of you, not because you just have to comply with the fact that violence should not be reality. So I think in Latin America, somehow citizens, they basically drive the trend and the fight for the quest for human rights.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. It's diversity, inclusion, equity, and also the belonging. I think we got Ylva Elman with us now. And Ylva, you work on the forefront of the Somali peace process. And we do know from research that when women are in the peace negotiations, peace lasts longer. We know that when there's more diversity in leadership, communities, companies, societies fare better. But given the importance of women's inclusion in the peace processes, what in your view needs to happen to get to a place with real, equal, meaningful participation in peace processes and beyond?
Thank you very much for having me on this distinguished panel. Just really piggybacking off of what Roberto just ended his last statement with, we need to move beyond just resolutions, declarations, commitments, and the rhetoric of the importance of women participating in inclusive, more progressive and safer environments, but also changing social norms and creating and supporting an environment which actually helps women and girls to thrive and be a part of the processes that ensure their well-being through giving access to services that support their agency. In my work, I have to say, in the peace and security apparatus, we have seen an overwhelming, we've seen the evidence. We have the resolutions. We're on 20 years of celebrating 1325, the inclusive role of women in peace and security. But every chance we have to actually implement these resolutions and these processes, the patriarchy rears its ugly head, and we still default to having 5 men creating the processes for an overwhelming majority of the population. It's frustrating that we are no longer in a place where we have to justify why women should be involved, and we have the legal framework, yet the implementation still lacks. So there's still a long way for us to go, but this COVID-19 pandemic, the effect that it has had on women and girls, the overwhelming conflicts in the world right now, we've seen women that are in leadership positions showing up and demonstrating why women need to be in these positions. So I'm in this position right now in my work right now where I'm very excited about what the future holds, but it's more about matching resources to the rhetoric and implementing all of this theory that we've have an overwhelming research and academic knowledge around.
Thanks. So we know that if we really want to get into the new era, the investment in frontline fighters, including you, is so important. And this is also where the political becomes personal and the personal becomes political. We all fight for something that can be very unpopular places. How do we both be our authentic self, but also make sure that everybody we fight with can be that? Ylva, would you talk to that?
I think at the end of the day, we're all fighting for the same things. Everyone wants to have a dignified life. They want to feel safe and want to feel secured. So I preach for social peace before political peace, because it takes a society to be a part of creating the conditions for safety, for an enabling environment, for security and for a progressive state, the work that human rights defenders, frontline workers do has been further amplified during this COVID pandemic, that frontline workers don't have the option to leave. They are always there. Whether it rains or it shines, we will always be there in the field doing the work. And I think that as we look at inclusive state building, inclusive processes, we need to recognize that frontline workers are not just beneficiaries of global processes or implementing partners at best, but they are part and parcel of designing interventions at global levels as well too. And I think the world is waking up to that as well too. We are in dawn right now where the role of youth activists, women activists, are not just seen as the spoils of war or conflict, but they are contributing meaningfully. And that's where I want to see the conversation moving forward to as well too.
Thanks. Lena, you are on board with some of the most amazing activist organizations. You're a feminist activist yourself. What is it that you need?
Well, first of all, I think what is desperately needed is a serious recognition that we are now beyond reform. The systems have failed everybody. They have failed women, they have failed the queer community, they have failed every single person. These systems are systems of oppression. So let us begin by at least, Katja, in using our own terminology, we're not there to embellish anything anymore. This is not working. We're looking for, and let's admit it, and let's be incredibly optimistic and incredibly bold. It's a system change. These systems, the regimes, let me talk just about our regions. They have massacred people. They have destroyed economies. They have destroyed the environment. They have created one of the biggest human exodus ever. We have one of the worst records of human rights violation everywhere, whether visible or invisible. So, trying to buy some more life into these systems is actually a joke. So at least let us listen to those who are leading the revolutions, those who are calling for change. These are not vacuous calls. These are calls which are actually based on decades of oppression, decades of violations of rights. So that recognition is the most important.
Thank you. Thank you. Roberto?
Well, first of all, I'm so privileged to be with Ilwar and Lena. And I really think that it's all about leadership space, really. I mean, there is such an imbalance. We are talking about policies, but fundamentally, we definitely need much more space for women to take charge of peace negotiation processes, both within the multilateral and beyond domains. I mean, we definitely need more women within companies' boards, and we need much more women in leadership positions in politics. I mean, we do see that the best policies when it comes to the reduction of vulnerabilities in relation to COVID have basically been systematically brought forward by 7 women presidents and prime ministers. I think that we need to really ensure that there is much more space and political, social, economic empowerment of women. And absolutely, as a man, I'm self-flagellating myself because I have less space. But that's fundamental. As long as there is no real space for empowerment, as long as women don't really lead into certain domains, we are not going to see a better world, not only for women, but also for men, for girls, and for boys.
Thanks. You know what? If you're going to ask the viewers to do one thing, what would that be? We're talking to the whole world here.
Well, I can just tag on from before. I mean, I think what we need to do is to really, be serious partners, be part of that alliance and mean it and really put all efforts. It's about human rights. It's about our own rights.
Thank you. You know what?
And really just on that point as well too, if there's one call to action I'd make right now for the audience that's listening globally. It's inform yourself and join movements that are existing. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are decades of experience at the grassroots level. Those of us that are on the panel today are not the exception, but we are the norm. There are everyday people doing incredible work in the face of extreme insecurities, and being an amplifier, joining a movement, supporting that ripple effect is something that you can do. And if there's one thing that we've learned during this COVID era that we're living in, is that we don't need to be in person with each other. We can do things digitally. We can support organizations and people from across the world. And my call to action to everyone today is to get involved from wherever you are.
Thank you. And Lena.
I would add to what Roberto and Ilwad have said. If you're not able to join us, if you're not able to be with us, to support us, just step down. Step down with dignity and give your place to those who are willing to join this global fight. It's no longer local or regional, it's global. I would really invite those who are withholding progress on gender equality to kindly step down.
So we say step up or step down.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Hello, Alan. I think I am deeply excited to be having this conversation with you as somebody whose story is amazing in many ways and very magical as regards gender and gender equity for that matter. And I think one of the things for me is the fact that the story of Unilever in ensuring equal representation leadership in record time, and not only doing that, but using the whole value chain for good, including and around sourcing, safety, supplies, diversity, and human rights. So my question would be, or rather something I would want you to share with all of us is, what does Unilever's feminist leadership look like? Because as a feminist myself, I'm deeply excited about this.
Hi, Schaefer. It's great to be chatting to you from London to Nairobi. I would say we're a work in progress. We're not at the end of the road at all. But I think it's interesting that if you go back to 1880, one of our founders, this guy, William Lever, described the mission of the firm as being to make cleanliness commonplace and lessen the load for women. All the way back then. Now, I don't know if he was an early feminist or an early stereotyper, but he certainly accurately captured that at the time, most of the domestic burden fell on women's shoulders. Fast forward to today, where we are right now is we've got pretty good representation of women in Unilever. We have 9 non-executive directors, 5 women, 4 men. We've got just over 10,000 managers. We've gone in the last 8 years from 38% women to now 51% women. On my immediate executive team, I'm a little embarrassed that of my direct reports, only 4 of 12 are women. So we've got work still to do there. We're not fully representative at the layer just below. And of course, there are geographies and functions around the company where we've not yet reached our goal of proper and full representation of women. If you want to, we can go into some of the things we're still working on. But that's just a little bit of a snapshot of where we are on our journey.
Right, right. And I believe as someone who also understands the entire ethos of feminism is knowing that for someone like me and the work that we are doing now as regards gender equity is knowing that feminism is the next frontier of gender equity. So it makes me also want to know more about what are some of your challenges, because I know that this is not an easy thing to be able to achieve, even having the kind of representation you have, right? So what are some of these shortcomings and the opportunities that have come with it? If you would love to share.
Well, I think the single biggest challenge that we still face is that women are not fully represented at the most senior levels inside our company. They are on our board, but there's inadequate representation of women at the most senior leadership levels. And that's a job that we're working very hard on. We've got, you can imagine all kinds of progressive policies. We've got, I think the most important thing is that it begins from the top. So we've made it an explicit strategic priority for Unilever to make sure that underrepresented groups are more represented in our business. It begins with women, but it does include the LGBTQI plus community. It does include people with disability, and it includes, of course, race and ethnicity. So there's a range of areas that we're working on. It starts by being an explicit part of our strategy. we believe the business case for diversity is more than made. And we also, maybe this is a little controversial, we are quite aggressive on setting targets. There's split opinion on whether you should have targets around equity, diversity, and inclusion. Well, we want to hold our leaders accountable. And a particularly interesting one that we're using, but it's evolving, is we worked with Harvard Business School to look at not the rate at which women were hired into specific roles, but rather the rate of hiring women of specific individuals. So no matter what job an individual's been over the last 5 years, we know their gender hiring rate. And it's a wonderful way of giving data-driven feedback to people so that there's no hiding from their accountability. So those are some of the steps that we're taking and some of the things we're thinking about.
Fantastic. I like it. I like it. And I think there are steps that other people could also adopt within their working institutions.
Yeah, I mean, actually, since you mentioned that, of course, our model of change begins with making sure that our own house is in order. We can't claim to go beyond into the world and take action beyond our own walls until we've got our own house in order. But our model of change just begins with our own company. We then look at our whole value chain, where we want to make sure that women are properly represented and properly paid in our supplier base. And we're creating financial freedom for all kinds of women as micro entrepreneurs in something we call our Shakti program. If you take somewhere like India, we've got villages in India where we equip women to be micro entrepreneurs and distribute our brands. They make a very small amount of money, but you can't believe how it transforms their life, their sense of self-esteem, but also the financial freedom. So we look at our own operations, we look at our value chain. The next thing is our brands. You know, that's the highest leverage we have, is with brands like Dove and Sunsilk, where we can really change social norms around what does beauty look like, and try and tackle these ridiculously unrealistic images of beauty that the beauty industry has created. And then finally, advocacy. And that's where I'm very proud to be involved with UN Women and the Unstereotype Alliance, and frankly, doing this kind of work to try and make sure that at the highest levels, policy is being set in a way that creates the right opportunities for women.
Fantastic, fantastic. I think also in our work at Women Political Leaders, where I work as the director of policy, is also focusing very deeply on perceptions. So the stereotyping, the barriers that come from that, the social conditionings that surround women's leadership is one of the things that we are also tackling very deliberately in terms of just measuring that, you know, beyond just saying, hey, we want women in leadership. But when we say additionally that we want women and we want women to lead now, people say, but why are they not leading? They should just jump into positions of leadership. But then when we explain to them that there's a whole perception and culture and conditioning that holds back women's leadership, right? That makes it difficult for women to participate the same way their counterparts are participating. They don't understand that. So I think one of the things that we're doing as an organization right now is measuring those perceptions with what we are calling the Reykjavik Index for Leadership, that measures perceptions, and it's sector specific. So it will measure within the education sector, the health sector, in academia, in agriculture, you know, in governance, in corporate, and it'll now show you where women lack and why they lack there. So you can no longer just run away from the fact that, oh my God, there are no more women. There's this perception thing. It's actually measured, and because now it's measured, we need action. So I'm happy that you're also doing that with beauty.
You're, you know, as you describe that, you're going beyond equality into equity and addressing some of the underlying barriers to bringing women into leadership. If you give a balance sheet of your work, what are you most happy about and what are you most frustrated about?
I think I'll start with the most frustrating. One of the things that makes me frustrated is the lack of commitment in terms of action when it comes to women's leadership. So we will commit, and by we, I mean very generally the world, and I'm not pointing fingers to anybody, but I'm just saying the world will commit to women's leadership in theory, but when in practice, when we now say, where does the rubber meet the road? Where do we put the money? Where do we open up spaces? Where do we start questioning policies that are retrogressive? Where do we start countering legislation that is holding women women back, then people start hesitating, you know? So that's my frustration. I think the thing that makes me overtly enthusiastic and happy about this space right now is the fact that women's voices are being heard, is the fact that we can see more visibly women leaders, younger women, women who've been holding the fort before, women who are passing the baton to other women in the space and bridging the intergenerational leadership gap. I think those women are there and actively engaging constantly and consistently. I think there's also a lot more determination when it comes to now women holding space. So a lot more women are saying, we are here, we want to do this, you either partner with us, but we are not going anywhere. So I think those are some of the things that make me really happy to wake up in the morning and to push the envelope, because a lot more women are saying, listen, the world is half women, you know, so we might as well be part of this conversation. So I think those are the things that make me optimistic, and then the frustration also, but we're getting there.
One big opportunity is that we make sure we have a just recovery from COVID. You know, women have been, it's really been a setback. I read these studies, and some say that the journey to equality has gone from 100 years to 200 years. It doesn't matter in the slightest. Both are totally unacceptable. We have to telescope those timeframes dramatically. Exactly. And I hope that we will build back better after COVID. One, you know, I'm naturally an optimist, and one opportunity I can see is there's a dialogue happening right now about massive labor shortages around the world. And at the same time, there's a dialogue about how women have been taken out of the workforce. There must be a way of putting those two facts together and creating a whole new generation of women who are inspired and given opportunity as the world recovers or moves to a new normal post this pandemic.
Exactly. And I think I'm also very much inspired by the generation that's alive and really refuses to settle, you know, because you can see how adamant they are in terms of just occupying their space. You can see their consistency in terms of the narratives they want to put forward around women, right? So abolishing the old narratives, or you have to be of a certain age to vie for a position, you have to have a certain kind of credential to go for this, you have to have a civil status, so you have to be married, and if you're married, you have to follow heteronormative ways of marriage or like systems of marriage. So it's very inspiring to see this younger generation occupy spaces and occupy them unapologetically, you know, and speak and stand amongst themselves and support each other. So that is deeply inspiring, because I remember my leadership journey was very lonely, because you find yourself as a young woman in a space where everybody has been here forever and you don't know where to start. So to see them rally around themselves and rally around such a bigger cause in terms of gender equity and putting progress into that and putting action into that is deeply inspiring. And I think if anything is going to happen, it's going to be them delivering the change that all of us have been working for. Even you, Alan, the change you've been holding on to is definitely coming to fruition with the generation that's here.
You know, Schaefer, I'm acutely conscious that as a middle-aged, white, straight man, I'm in a position of, you know, incredible privilege.
Right.
And my leadership team and I have been through a journey over the last couple of years just to try and make sure we understand that. And it's involved a lot of reverse mentoring, opening ourselves up to stories and the lived experiences of some of the women in our organization. And I can tell you there's been some tears in the boardroom as we've heard some of the things that have happened even in our own organization. So lots of progress as ever. It's the next generation who are going to hold us grown-ups to account. And you're quite right. What's better than the energy and the enthusiasm of young people? Totally, and agreed. You know, one of our best programs is actually in your backyard. We've got Her Majesty Queen Maxim of the Netherlands chairs something called the CEO Partnership for Economic Inclusion. And it's disproportionately focused on creating entrepreneurial opportunities for women. And she's brought together various companies from different sectors to work on a program. There's one in Kenya called Jazaduka, which is basically providing credit for small scale retailers so they can grow their business in the lack of access to any borrowing has held most of these retailers back. And it's very interesting to us that by far the majority of people who take advantage of this program happen to be women entrepreneurs in Kenya. And it just shows the energy, the trapped potential that's out there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Women have been ready. They've just needed access to capital. They've needed people to believe in them. They've needed people to guide them in the right direction. But the intuition, the wherewithal to do it, and the grit to do that work, I think women have been ready. So it's wonderful to know this. And it's wonderful to know that there are people who are now putting money where it should be, in the hands of women who've been running economies without them being recognized as people who run economies and running households.
What's your view on sort of senior global role models? I must say I see more and more senior women role models. If you look at, who's running the IMF, who's the president of the European Union, who's running the World Bank, who's, you suddenly see more, who were the heads of state that did the best job managing through COVID. I think that's particularly inspiring, that there are more role models coming through for young women and girls to look to say, yes, I can be the next head of the IMF. I can be the next head of my country. I think that's very exciting.
Right. I could be the next president, and I don't need any other qualification other than to know that I am capable and I have the work, I have the ethics, I have what is needed to run whatever institution I am given to run. So I think it's deeply inspiring, because we also have our first female Chief Justice ever, and it's wonderful to just imagine what this does for the generation that's coming, for the young girls growing up and seeing a female Chief Justice at the pinnacle of law, right? She's heading the most powerful office. And that's something that is not by chance, and it cannot be taken for granted, because the message that passes to every other person watching is just knowing that it's time for partnership with women, and it's time for women to lead. And we only call for allies and allyship that is genuine and truly rooted in the progress of everyone.
Well, that's one of the principles of he for she is, if you want more women in positions of power, hire better men. And so it sounds like you've got your sights set very high, and may you find a lot of air under your wings, and look forward to staying close and watching you rise into positions of even bigger authority.
Thank you so much, and looking forward to all the good work that Unilever is doing in terms of your leadership and just your revolutionary approach to incorporating gender into your work. Deeply, deeply, deeply honored, and truly wishing you the best.
Thanks, Schaefer. See you soon.
See you.
That was great to hear the conversation between the two inspiring world leaders, Schaefer Okora and Alan Yoke. And I am now thrilled to welcome two other world influencers, Bogolo Joy Kenewendo and Nala Valji. And thanks for being with us here today on this fabulous day in the SDG Action Zone, dedicated to gender equality and a new era for women and girls. SDG, #Action Zone 2021, and #UNGA 2021. So let me start broad, as I did in the panel we just saw before, with local frontline fighters. So if we want to see a gender equal world and a new era for girls and women, create real change in the communities and countries. Bogolo, will you start?
Thank you very much, Katya, and so nice to be able to join this panel and be on the same panel with Nala. For me, it's quite simple. We all have to be involved, and the legislators have to be involved to ensure that the policy that they work on in particular influences the perception, because after all, it is really the perception that leads how we do things in the society, and influences how we accept women as leaders or how we accept women as participants in the economy. And then it's up to us, everyday people in the streets, civil society, to ensure that we put enough pressure towards the delivery of gender equality. It might not be feminism, it might not be gender equality, but that we push and put enough pressure for us to have equal access to opportunities. And that really is where I think the cracks lies.
Thank you. Thank you. Nala.
Thanks so much, Katja, and such a pleasure to be with both you and Bogolo here today. I want to just echo what's already been said. I think, every single one of us has power to change the world. And we need to start with ourselves, and we need to start with our communities and our families. We need to interrogate ourselves. Gender is like the air that we breathe. We don't think about it unless we stop to think about it. And we need to start with the social norms that we uphold ourselves. Do young girls do different chores in the house? Do they get different allowance? Are they taught that it's, their emotions are different than boys? Do we call out bad jokes that we hear being told, or reinforcement of a rape culture? But I really want to focus today on the political level and political will, because I think what is needed in this moment is rapid change, and rapid change is possible. And what is going to get us there is leaders across every sector simply making the decision to enforce quotas and special measures to bring women to the table in equal representation and equal leadership in every sector. And that is the game changer. That is what is going to get us to a gender equal world, and a different world, not just for women and girls, but one that's going to benefit everybody.
Thank you very much. That was a really good start. So do it yourself, take it in on the personal level, but also the political and very concrete suggestion about quotas, legislation, etc. Thanks a lot. Oglo, last time I saw you, you were rocking the G20 Women's Empowerment Ministerial Conference, and before that it was the G7. And next time it'll be in Reykjavik Global Forum in November, where you as a women political leader special envoy will be. So let me ask you, we've said for a long time that we are at a tipping point for a more gender equal world. Then COVID hit, and in some areas, many areas, we've seen big regress and rollback. So honestly, what will it take us to make the world tip the right way? What is it that it will take to not see more regress and rollback? Because that can be my big worry today. We've always been optimistic and said it's going forward, but is it? How do we make sure we tip the right way?
That is certainly a really good question, and something that we're really worried about, because we have seen that COVID has disproportionately affected women, and that more women have actually had to leave the workforce and have been, thrown out of the labor force and the economy. And going back to what I said earlier, it's important that we have our legislators work. So in order for us not to roll back, we have to have political will that ensures that as we build back, as we work on these COVID-19 recovery policies, we have women and gender equality issues right at the heart of recovery, and that they're not a sideline, a side event issue, but they are right at the heart of every recovery matter. And this is why it was so important that during the G7, the GIAC made those recommendations. We had a whole list of recommendations from the economy, working with aid for trade, working with finance, all the way to digital inclusion, because every aspect of it is important. And it was important that the GIAC participates not only in a women meeting, but to ensure that our issues are taken to the summit, so that every recovery policy really looks at those issues. And then secondly, the Reykjavik Index, which I really want to talk about as well, that we recommend you look at it, and that we recommend that there be more inclusion of women in leadership positions as we build back better, or as we build better going forward, to ensure that our policies are as as diverse, as inclusive as possible, because that is what we know we will need. We have talked about why it's important to have women at the heart of policy since about 95 and before. And we said in order for us to deal with poverty and inequality, we need to focus on women. And I think COVID-19 is really showing that what we've been discussing is actually what really needs to be done. And I'm hoping that we will see some of those changes. And yes, some of our recommendations came out in the communique, and I hope to see more of those in the G20 and then being implemented as we go forward.
Good. Nala, how do we move from the rhetorics and the commitments to the action?
Yeah, I think what you said is really important, Katja. In the last year and a half, even the fragile gains that we've made on gender equality, we've gone backwards. Latest statistics say that women lost $800 billion in the formal economy last year alone. This is exacerbating inequalities that already were there. Prior to the pandemic, the 20 richest men were more wealthy than all of the women in Africa put together. And these statistics, I mean, you add to that, you aggravate. The World Economic Forum has now said that the gender inequality gap was already wide. It has gone backwards by 30 years. That is a generation of young girls. So yes, we have gone backwards. Yes, we are. We have reason to be incredibly concerned in this moment. But I also choose to still be optimistic. And the reason for that is that we are continuing to have these conversations, and we are having these conversations with new people and a new awareness. And I think that in the last year and a half, we have shed a light on alarming increases of violence against women and girls, the increased care burden that women and girls face that is at the heart of economic inequality. But we've also shed a light on women's leadership. Across the world, we have seen that it has been women leaders as heads of state, as mayors, as health ministers, et cetera, who have been making strong policy decisions, who have been leading in an inclusive way. And the wealth of evidence that we have on women's leadership for effective outcomes for all has only increased in this period. So for that reason, I'm still optimistic that we can move forward in a positive direction from here. And again, going back to the point, the game changer is women's equal representation and participation. And when that happens, we start to have different outcomes. And I want to just mention, Bogola joined us last year for a Women Economist meeting that the Secretary General held. And it was really to hear different diverse voices on how the economic recovery from COVID needs to look. And one of the things I really want to emphasize is the care economy. We are seeing countries invest in the care economy as part of their recovery in a way that just 10 years ago never would have happened. But again, the fact that we marginalize and have a $0 value on everything that happens to produce, reproduce, and care for society is a direct result of the fact that women simply weren't at the table when we were creating GDP metrics and macroeconomic policies all of those years ago. And so gender balanced leadership and representation is really going to be what shifts us into the direction of sustainable, equal, and a climate just recovery as well.
Thank you. Bogola, do you just have a comment for the, a renowned economist, a comment on the care economy?
Yeah, actually, I first wanted to add on that having equal representation is important, but over and above having equal representation, we want agency in representation. So it's not that when we say we want more women at the table, we don't want them to then get there and not have the voice. We want that voice, and it's the voice that will bring about change. And when it comes to the care economy, as I was saying earlier, we have seen more women actually leave the workplace, actually leave the labor force, and are left in the care economy where the contribution to the economy is actually not recognized, or they are not getting as compensated as they should be. And there are a couple of recommendations that we have put out that I want to highlight, both in relation to women being left out of the labor force and what governments can concretely do, in particular those that are more well off than others, using the economic economic power, the financial power to assist women. And one of those things was through the use of ODA, that overseas development assistance should be very clear, have an indicator that 30%, at least 30% of it should be used towards women empowerment initiatives. And this is a vivid and a concrete example that has been done by countries like Australia. So it's not something that is a pie in the sky. It's something that has worked, and we have seen the impacts of it through various programs that are running out of Tanzania, in Nigeria, and many countries in the global south. And then the other one, is really that we should show that we can use global and public finance to crowd in private finance in order to elevate women's economic agency. And that is very important as well.
So summing it up, follow the money.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, and also, if I may just kind of riff a little bit on what you said, it is not just about getting to the table. It's about having a voice at the table, and it's also about leading the discussion often.
Yes.
So when we talk about leadership and diversity, it's diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity. So you pointed to something that I just want to pick up on, Nala, and that was how we need to talk to other people. You know, if we really want to change this, we can't keep the discussion in our smaller circles. And, you know, long live the UN, but, you know, kind of, and implementation and the action there. But what I also see is the sports. How do we get women engaged, but also how do we get the sports world to embrace? How do we get the food system, the big food system summit, and get a gender lens to that? How do we get into new tents and talk about these issues? Is going to be absolutely crucial if we want to see the change. The tent is small. We need to have it bigger, but that also means talking in a way that people can both feel it and understand it. On the norm side, if I may, Bogolo, it is, you know, we want to see the change. We want to see it all the time. We want to see it big time. What we heard Alan and Sheffer talk about in the conversation just before, they talked about the power of young people and young women saying enough is enough, and not just demanding, but also making change. And Alan spoke about how do we address norms and go against the stereotypes, which live so well in societies today. But you mentioned the Reykjavik index that measures the opinions about women's leadership. And that's not going the right way in all places. How do we all, both as individuals, but also as part of various systems, support that work and dismantle those harmful norms that both hold girls and women back, but also keep the patriarchy running the show? Who wants to start?
Nala.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. I think, Katja, you know, you already mentioned engaging sectors that we haven't engaged before. I think sports is incredibly important. The modeling impact, and we've seen this in evidence, the modeling impact that young boys take from their sports stars is incredible. And so I think there's increased work that's happening there. I would say the entertainment industry, the cultural industries generally, you know, what we see, the modeling impact of what we see is incredible. What comes into your home every day on your television, the stories that get told, what you internalize, what young girls internalize and young boys internalize about what's expected of them in society. Those are the real game changers for the next generation. So I do think those are the sectors that we need to be building with much more than we have been. But you know, going back again, normative change happens at every level, and it has got to happen at the individual and family level for us to have the kind of impact from the ground up. And I think, you know, the role of young people is incredibly important, and young women, yes, but I would say young people generally. We are seeing young people in the streets in so many countries in these past years, and they are imagining a different kind of world. They want to inherit a different kind of world than what we have created. They want a more democratic, gender equal, sustainable planet sustainable world than what our models have created. And so I think we also need to be creating, co-creating spaces, be shifting power, be bringing them to the table as equal partners. And again, that point about agency and influence is critically important. But there's got to be space for young people to be part of the decision making on the world that they're going to inherit.
And one of the discussions we had in the previous debate was the panel was also, how can we everybody be their authentic selves in all the rich diversity? And that's an enormous issue.
Yeah, I know that changing stereotypes and cultures is very difficult, and it takes a long time, as evidenced by the fact that we're still talking about gender equality many, many decades later. But I believe that the moment we move these conversations from side events to main sessions to plenary would be one way to really show and demonstrate that gender equality issues and matters are not just for women, that they are for everybody and everyone should care about them. And for people who care about the economy and care about the pockets, they also should know that they need to have skin in the game, because if more women participate in the economy, we could have an additional of over 28 trillion or something to the sort added to the GDP. Talking about gender equality and changing the stereotypes of women in leadership is not just an emotional matter. And I think that's something that we really have to highlight. It's a humanity issue, but it's also an economic issue. And I really like to highlight this for those that really care about their money more than they should. And then what you brought up with the Reykjavik index, there are actually some pockets that are worrying, that are showing a younger generation of men that do not believe that women can lead and should lead in certain sectors. And for me, that means that there is a lot of work that needs to be done, a lot of work that needs to be done over conditioning, bringing in more men into gender equality discussion matters. And also, like I said earlier, policy informs perception. Perception informs policy. So if we can start off with the leadership issue, pushing regulators to do the right reforms that recognizes women's agency in the economy, then we will see it happening as well in perceptions as people see a representation.
Thank you. And time flies when we're having fun. So final 30 seconds to each of you. What is the most helpful, powerful things that the viewers can do to support the issues and bringing on that new era for girls and women? Nala, 30 seconds.
I would just echo what I said earlier. I think question every day in everyday actions. How are you treating women and men, non-binary? Are you calling out where there's unacceptable norms and standards, and how has it infused your life? And make those changes at that level. Make choices in your daily life and support allies. I think will make a real difference.
Thanks, Bogolo. Fast, furious, and fabulous.
Right. Speak up, and ensure that we are not just operating in your space of just being gender aware, but make sure that what you do is also gender transformative, because it is for the betterment of the world and what we bequeath to the next generation.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot to all the viewers, to Ilwan, to Lena, to Robert, to Shefa, to Alan, to Bogolo and Nala for wise words and great action. The new era for girls and women depends on these concrete actions and on you, all of you. So step it up or step down. Let me end by a tweet. Moving from rhetoric to reality, a new era for women and girls is coming. Hashtag SDG Action Zone 2021. Hashtag for people, for planet. Thank you very much.